Europe is in a fight for a continent that is whole and at peace, for a free and independent Europe, a fight for our values and our democracies, a fight for our liberty and our ability to determine our destiny for ourselves.
These strong words kicked off Commission President Ursula von der Leyen's speech on this year's State of the Union. Her address in the European Parliament was one of the most anticipated events in the EU calendar. Her speech was a powerful call to action, setting out a vision for a stronger, more independent Europe. While talking about defense, Ursula von der Leyen also mentioned protecting European industries and increasing competition, but some people aren't sure that the route she set out is the best one. We'll take a look at the Commission's claimed successes and what they're planning for the future, as spelled out in their From Promise to Progress report, and then we'll take a look at the big criticisms that have come from civil society organizations and trade unions. And with that, welcome to today's episode of On Your Left, the news brief that looks behind the headlines on international economic developments and politics in and around Europe. My name is Felix Sassmannshausen. President von der Leyen kicked off her State of the Union speech by giving a pretty bleak view of where Europe is right now in a pretty rocky world, calling it an independence moment. She said that Europe needs to fight for its place, its values, and its ability to determine its own destiny. The main message was about unity, calling on member states, EU institutions, and pro-European democratic forces to join forces to deliver for all Europeans. When it came to security, the message was very clear. We're 100% behind Ukraine. The president announced a new reparations loan that's paid for by Russian assets that can't be moved and a drone alliance with Ukraine to counter Russia's industrial mass production in drone warfare. This is on top of the significant financial and military aid that's already been provided, totaling almost 170 billion euros.
L'Europe défendra chaque centimètre carré de son territoire, mesdames et messieurs.
The Commission's Readiness 2030 initiative aims to unlock up to 800 billion euros in defense investments. Just a few days ago, the Commission had announced that the SAFE program is already at full capacity, providing 150 billion euros for joint defense procurement. The idea of an Eastern flank watch and a drone wall shows that the EU Commission is serious about having its own strategic capabilities. This is also the focus of the Commission's report From Promise to Progress that talks about the first year of the von der Leyen Commission and how they're trying to make Europe more competitive and strengthen its social model. The main focus there is on making things simpler, with 6 packages suggested to cut admin burdens by at least 25% for all companies and 35% for small and mid-sized enterprises by the end of the mandate. These efforts are estimated to save businesses over 8 billion euros in annual administrative costs. This is also done by making sustainability reporting easier for small and mid-sized enterprises, making carbon border adjustment mechanism applications simpler, and easing rules for farmers. The report says that the value-added tax in the Digital Age initiative will save EU traders over 4 billion euros per year in compliance costs. That is necessary, the Commission says, because Europe is aiming to lead the AI race, with gigafactories being set up across 16 member states and significant private and public investment mobilized through Invest AI. Von der Leyen said she'd meet with the big bosses of some of Europe's biggest tech companies. These companies will be putting a lot of money into European tech, she says. The Choose Europe strategy is all about getting top scientists on board and supporting tech companies. And the Clean Industrial Deal will be about cutting emissions and keeping up competitiveness. The plan is to reduce emissions by 90% by 2040 and set aside over 100 billion of euros for cleaner manufacturing. The so-called battery booster package and the Made in Europe rules in public procurement are supposed to help Europe stay ahead in clean tech. Von der Leyen promised to protect the steel and car industry, and she said,
Europe will always remain open. We like competition, but we will always protect our industry from unfair competition.
Initiatives like Buy European Food or the Small Affordable Cars Act are designed to support European industries and consumers. In her speech, von der Leyen also announced the Quality Jobs Act to help workers and a strategy to tackle poverty. The goal is to get rid of poverty completely by 2050, a bold announcement. To this end, the Commission is working on policies to deal with the cost of living, especially energy prices. They're planning to increase homegrown renewable energy sources, as she says. While Ursula von der Leyen, the Commission President, paints a picture of progress and strategic ambition, she's also getting support from her EPP colleagues like Manfred Weber. The trade deal with the US got the thumbs up from the Conservatives, as did the migration policy. But they did say that the Green Deal is a bit of a roadblock for European competitiveness right now. The Socialists, though, weren't happy with the trade deal with the US, and they said they're going to try and change it, calling it unfair and unacceptable. And they criticized the Commission's foreign policy stance on Israel and the ongoing war in the Gaza Strip. The socialists said, "Where's Europe when Gaza's on the brink?" pointing out that the proposed freeze on cooperation with Israel that Ursula von der Leyen announced is a bit too little too late. On the dire situation for the civilian population in Gaza, von der Leyen said in her speech that the man-made famine was awful and there needed be a ceasefire, free humanitarian aid, and the unconditional release of the hostages. She said that she was worried about Europe not being able to agree on a plan and suggested that support for Israel should be put on hold and sanctions on extremist ministers and violent settlers in the West Bank put in place. Israel criticized the position of the EU Commission as one-sided and sending a false signal to Hamas, who started the war with its massacre of Israeli civilians on October 7th 2 years ago. The left group and the Greens criticized the Commission for not going far enough regarding sanctioning Israel. Europe should think as a power, the Greens said, demanding immediate action to address the situation in the Gaza Strip. The left denounced the EU's alleged silence on the humanitarian crisis and war crimes committed by the Israeli military in Gaza, accusing it of double standards in foreign policy. Regarding the economic policies, the Greens demanded stronger actions on climate change, calling for investments in European renewables and other industries. The left called the trade deal with the US a total capitulation, criticizing that the EU is spending billions in militarization alongside brutal cuts in pensions and welfare. Criticism of the trade policy and the Green Deal also came from the far right. But not just in Parliament. Civil society organizations are also really worried about EU policy, especially the Commission's simplification effort. A statement by 470 civil society organizations, trade unions, and public interest groups says that the EU is risking a new race to the bottom by implementing an unprecedented wave of drastic cuts to regulations. So, these civil society organizations are saying that what the Commission calls simplification is actually deregulation, and that's a threat to protections for labor rights and social rights, human rights, digital rights, and the environment. The statement really challenges the Commission's claim that this is about getting rid of superfluous red tape, using historical events like the financial crisis and the Dieselgate as evidence that trusting companies to do the right thing isn't always realistic. One of the main worries is also the process itself. The statement says that new measures give companies a seat at the top table of EU lawmaking, while public interest actors are left out. And they claim that the way consultation is done is flawed. This makes it easier for companies to get a say while pushing other groups like civil society organizations to the side. Also, the use of urgent procedures and the lack of vital impact assessments are criticized for stopping critical voices and bypassing democratic debate in the European Parliament. Currently, the European Ombudswoman is looking into these questions. On top of that, Industry All Europe, the Industrial Workers Union, made a strong statement before the State of the Union speech. They are calling for a new social contract that puts workers at the heart of Europe's industrial change. They point out that we're in a really tricky situation at the moment, with loads of factory closures, investments being put on the back burner, demand dropping off, and all the pressure of going green and digital. Industrial is thus calling for workplace democracy, collective bargaining, and strong social conditions on all public funding. The union is saying that there's a difference in how resources are shared, just like the left has been saying. If we can get 800 billion euros for defense through the Rearm Europe thing in a few days, why isn't there more urgency for funding for industrial renewal and social justice, they ask. So, to sum it up and put it into context, President von der Leyen has come up with a plan to make Europe more independent and competitive. She's going to make a big push for defense and technology. At least, that is what she's boldly announcing. As always, the question is what will remain of the big plans in the coming years. For her announcement, she used some strong language to call for a new European Union to be born out of the current crises. She wants the EU to be more independent from autocracies like Russia, but also from its ally, the United States, in defense matters. Another key part of the EU's current plans is about competition in a global market that's getting more and more competitive with too much capacity. So the Commission is cracking down on red tape in the supply chains of companies. We're expecting to see even more financial aid for companies and defense industries, but the EU's fiscal rules are making countries cut spending, which is going to hit social investments. The left, civil society organizations, trade unions, and climate initiatives are all criticizing this heavily. So the question is going to be whether the Commission will try and find some middle ground with these actors, which seems unlikely because the EPP mainly criticized the Social Democrats for their position regarding the Commission policies. So this suggests that they might work more closely with the far right on certain issues. And with that, we're at the end of this episode of On Your Left. If you want to get regular updates on what I'm doing, you can subscribe to my newsletter, which is published every Tuesday. Otherwise, you might want to think about a subscription on Steady or Substack. I'd be really grateful. And until next time.